Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19090 in the name of Jamie Green on addressing the postcode lottery of early learning and childcare provision. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate. Please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jamie Green to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank members who have stayed the course this afternoon, and also those who supported my original motion, which allowed it to come to the debate chamber this afternoon. Can I also thank those organisations who have written to us ahead of the debate, including Close the Gap and the National Day Nurseries Association, for circulating some research, some very thoughtful research ahead of the debate. And of course the many parents who saw this in the business programme and who have written to me on this particular issue, particularly those from my own region. Let's start with the basics. In Scotland, parents are entitled to 1140 hours of free childcare each year for all 3- and 4-year-olds. Some eligible 2-year-olds are also included in this, but today principally I will focus on those aged 3 years or more. And I should say from the outset that I do support and welcome this policy. And I also know that for my many years in here, particularly a spell on the Education Committee, and also as the Shadow Education Secretary at one point, that the early years sector is not one without issues, something I am sure we will discuss today. But the very genesis of today's debate came when I was contacted by parents from the West region who were concerned about the eligibility criteria to funded childcare. Now, I'm not a parent, so I inquired further as to what the problem is. Until this year, 3-year-olds in East Dunbartonshire could access this provision from the day after their 3rd birthday. That makes complete sense. That changed. They will now have to wait until the start of the next academic term to access childcare. So in practice, that means that a child who turns 3 years of age on the 1st of September, for example, would have to wait until the new year before they can access much-needed early learning in that region. Now, this results in many children missing out on up to 4 months of vital early learning places in comparison to peers who were born just a few days before. Now, East Dunbartonshire Council are not alone in having made this decision around the date of access. Inverclyde and North Ayrshire Council, also both in the West region, have adopted a very similar position. But, for example, if you are a few miles up the road in Renfrewshire, for example, children can access provision from the month after their 3rd birthday. In Glasgow, a few miles further up the M8, it is even more generous, and children can access this entitlement from the Monday after their 3rd birthday. So we often talk about postcode lotteries when it comes to accessing public services, and it's a bit of a cliché, to be honest, but this really is a postcode lottery in its truest sense. The Scottish Government's statutory guidance to local authorities around this very issue states that eligibility starts from, I quote, the beginning of the first term after the child's 3rd birthday. And whilst councils do have discretionary powers to provide funded early learning sooner than this, in fact, they are also encouraged to do so in that same guidance. The reality is, though, that many are simply not in a financial position to do so. Indeed, East Dunbartonshire Council made that decision with a very explicit aim of saving £757,000. And that's not a small amount of cash to save by making that decision. The reality is councils right up and down this country have been making impossibly difficult decisions for a number of years to plug the £650 million budget gap that they face in this financial year alone. Now, that doesn't look any better as we look down the barrel of future years. The Accounts Commission forecasts a budget versus resource delta of almost £1 billion in the next 2 years. So it's no surprise that councils are making difficult decisions in delaying access to early years. Yes, they're just simply following the guidelines. They have opted for the minimum, not the optimum provision of early years. But this comes at the expense of parents. Parents who will either have to fund that childcare privately, if they're able to, or delay going back into or even into the workplace at all. None of which is helping those families, and none of which is helping the Scottish economy. Yes, if I can get my time.
Brian Whittle.
very grateful to Jamie Green to take an intervention, listening to his speech, and I have to agree with everything he says so far. But would also agree with me, it comes at a cost to the child as well, who's not accessing that sort of interaction with the other children of that age.
Jamie Green.
I couldn't agree more. I'm actually going to come on to some of the cognitive effects that this has on a child of 3 years of age. I think a wider point, though, is, as I hope Mr Whittle will agree with, is that the whole sector is in desperate need of focus, and that's why they wrote to us ahead of today's debate. The National Day Nurseries Association warned quite simply that the current funding model does not sufficiently cover the costs incurred by nurseries to provide childcare. And they are right to point out that if people like myself want to expand that eligibility to a more universal access, we must also recognise the flaws in the current funding model. Now, they believe that, on average, there is around a £1.40 shortfall between funding rates and costs per hour. 76% of their members report that they believe that they will operate either at break-even or at a loss this year. Now, of course, those are not reasons not to expand eligibility, but those are reasons to fix the current funding model. This week, we have a much wider political focus on poverty, and rightly so. The Scottish Government itself has an explicit aim of reducing child poverty, and I support that aim. But the Fraser of Allender Institute states that limited access to affordable childcare is, I quote, the elephant in the room when it comes to raising parental employment. The Scottish Women's Budget Group conducted a survey on this very issue. They found that 50% of women reported that managing childcare has impacted the volume of paid work that they take on, and a third have reported they are now reducing working hours simply to meet childcare costs. And these are substantial costs. They're not to be sniffed at. The Scottish Government's own household survey, published this morning, says that 16% of households are spending between £5,000 and £10,000 per year on childcare. That figure was just 10% back in 2018, so it's gone up massively. And for the vast majority of families, that money is simply not there, and it's just not affordable. The point on Mr Whittle's intervention, high-quality early learning is vital to support a child's cognitive development and social skills. UNICEF have identified this as one of the key factors. They know that children from lower-income backgrounds are at greater risk of learning delays or falling behind their more affluent peers. They also identify that children who have access to high-quality early learning will do better, both in their attainment, in higher job earnings, and are more likely to stay out of the criminal justice systems. There are plenty of upsides down the line in this. My question is simply this: why are children in Scotland subject to this postcode lottery when it comes to accessing early years provision? My motion makes a simple ask. The Scottish Government must change the guidance, and it must guarantee funded places across all local authorities from the day after a child's third birthday. And if that is not doable, then the Government is not minded to change that guidance or indeed fund any change, then other options should be considered. Ultimately, Presiding Officer, I am seeking universality and the quality of access to early learning and development across Scotland. That simply does not exist at present. So the Government must end this postcode lottery, it must encourage more parents back into the workplace, and it must properly fund early learning provision from a child's third birthday, no matter where you live in Scotland. I look forward to hearing what the Minister and others have to say in response to these calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. We now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Alistair Allen to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Dr Allen.
Presiding Officer, I would like to begin by thanking Jamie Green for bringing this important matter before the Chamber this evening. Mr Green's motion begins by recognising the importance of funded early learning and childcare, giving every child in Scotland the best start in life. Scotland remains, it should be said, the only part of the UK where 1,140 hours a year of funded ELC are available to all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds, regardless of their parents' working status. This helps, I believe, to promote equality and make sure every child accesses the same high-quality early learning foundation. All of which said, the motion notes that there are variations in the commencement date of funded hours across local authorities, and in just the last few weeks there has also been reports of some local authorities restricting funded hours to specific nurseries, including term-time only nurseries. Many individuals and organisations are pushing very hard to ensure local provision around the country meets demand. And I can think of organisations in my own constituency, like the Euston Barra Childcare Forum or the new outdoor facility in North Eust, Otter Mountain, which has just last week received its Care Inspectorate registration, allowing it to begin operating as an after-school and holiday childcare facility. It's only right, too, that I acknowledge the challenges faced in rural and island areas where the distances involved make it impossible for parents to shop around to access the childcare they need. Some of this is, of course, a consequence, in part, of declining numbers of childminders. There are, for instance, now no childminders left in Barra or in Eust or in Harris, and there has been a steep drop in the number of childminders in Lewis in recent years too, a trend, of course, reflected in some other parts of the country. I've heard examples of parents who now have to take an inter-island ferry journey daily to access a place at a nursery for their child, and that, I should say, is, to quote, an extreme rather than a representative example. However, last May I carried out a survey amongst parents of young children in my constituency, which found that although they were making use of what was available and grateful for it, they found that 82% of parents surveyed said that they or their partner were unable to work as many hours as they wanted due to childcare issues, and these views were reflected at a meeting I held in Benbecula with parents recently about this. Presiding Officer, solving these issues is not straightforward, but it is right that we debate it. The country is often rightly cited as world leaders in childcare and in preschool education, of course, have the fiscal levers available to them of small independent countries, and I would respectfully suggest to those who come after me in this debate that if we are willing to ask for substantial additional spending in this area, we also either have to be willing to identify the fiscal freedoms that would achieve it, or to identify where in Scotland's existing budget that money might be found. However, on some measures, I hope a greater degree of consensus does exist and will exist across the Chamber in this debate, such as on the need to ensure equity of access for funded hours across Scotland, and on building on the good work already being done to boost the creation and sustaining of childminding businesses, the better tailoring of Care Inspectorate requirements, and ensuring good pay and conditions both across the private and local authority-run nurseries to strengthen Scotland's childcare sector.
Thank you, Dr Allen. I now call Megan Gallagher to be followed by Martin Whitfield. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 5th of September 2023, Humza Yousaf announced a plan to improve childcare. A pilot to expand childcare provision from 9 months to the end of primary school, alongside plans to accelerate care provision expansions for 2-year-olds and more parental choice to make childcare flexible. Well, 2 years on, where are we? Well, we're not world-leading, as some SNP members would have us believe, because despite repeated promises, the SNP has failed to deliver on its pledge to expand early learning and childcare provision to children from the age of 9 months. The pilot was scrapped before it even managed to get off the ground. If I may remind the Chamber that this was a flagship policy, hailed as transformational for parents. But like so many other SNP promises, free bikes, free laptops, full rollout of free school meals, and that's just to name a few, it turned out to be hollow words. Parents were told by this government that they would back them, but then they turned their backs on them. Nowhere is this betrayal more evident than in places like North Lanarkshire in my own region, where the council does not provide early learning and childcare provision until the start of the term after a child turns 3. And the reason for that? Budget pressures. Let's take a closer look at what this means for parents. A child who turns 3 in September will not receive funded childcare until January. Months of additional pressure on working parents, months of missed learning opportunities for their child. But this is not just an administrative error made by one local authority, as Jamie Green rightly states in his motion. This is commonplace, a postcode lottery. But councils are just following the guidance. And who sets the guidance? Well, it's the Scottish Government who sets the guidance. This is a systemic failure, one that leaves parents in an impossible position and those hoping to start a family perhaps thinking again. So why is that? Well, without funded childcare support, parents have been forced to make an unfair choice. Go back to work, pay extortionate childcare costs, some outpricing the cost of their own rent or mortgage, or give up work altogether, sacrificing income, career progression and financial stability. Not many families have a choice whether to work or to stay at home. Pregnant and Scrooge reported in September 2025 that over half of parents were forced to reduce their working hours or leave their jobs due to the high cost of childcare, with 1 in 4 families paying more than £1,000 a month. The Government needs to acknowledge that childcare is not a luxury. It's not just nice to start a family. It's a pillar of a functioning economy. Given that birth rates are declining, we need to make it easier, not harder, for couples to start a family. When parents are priced out of the workforce because they cannot find affordable childcare, we all lose. Parents are not a burden on our system. They are contributing taxpayers, they are the backbone of local and national economies, and they deserve a government that supports them so they can give back. But under this SNP government, promises will continue to be made and continue to be broken. Families are repeatedly told by this government that help is on the way, only to be told and left behind by a government who views them as an afterthought, because this is what it is. Its parents are being told that they are an afterthought. Local authorities like North Lanarkshire are unable to deliver because of a lack of resource, planning and political will from the top. And that's not political will from councils. That's political will from this Scottish Government to acknowledge the problems that we experience within our childcare provision and make the necessary changes to fix it. We do need a childcare system that works for every family, one that's accessible, affordable and delivers. But I will finish on a question today. Is it the case that the SNP government have completely given up on expanding or fixing the problems of childcare? Have they forgotten? Or is it the case that they're just completely incapable of fixing the problems that we've got in our childcare sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I now call Martin Whitfield to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Mr Whitfield.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And it's a pleasure to follow Gallagher's articulate debate on what the challenges that face us. And I'd like to thank Jamie Green, of course, for allowing us to discuss this subject today. And the statistics have already been outlined in the chamber earlier today, and they paint a very, very grim picture. A picture of families who have been let down by outlandish promises of the SNP government that they've then failed to deliver. And I welcome the fact that the motion notes calls for the Scottish Government to guarantee that funded places are available from the day after a child's 3rd birthday, because a significant number of parents that I've spoken to sort of fully expected that. That's what they thought it meant. And then they only found afterwards that this was not the case. But we have to acknowledge that these guarantees are utterly meaningless unless we can provide the childcare workforce with the adequate support they need to be there to provide the childcare. To take another postcode lottery that's occurred, which is to do with the interpretation of the guidance, which is what councils are being forced to turn to try and make these savings, is the case between Edinburgh City Council and the surrounding councils where we have cross-boundary support, where parents are being required, if they're coming into Edinburgh, only to go to the city nurseries rather than the private nurseries, which may indeed be geographically far better located, may indeed be the nurseries where the children have been in earlier in their lifetime and understand the people who are there. So, in all forms, we are seeing challenges that are being thrown at parents who want to return to work, who want to know that their child is safe, who want to know that their child is in an environment where they can properly develop. But the amount of time they are being required to put into, the amount of thought they're being required to put into how on earth they're going to provide childcare for their children means they have no other opportunities but to spend almost their entire time begging of grandparents, begging of families, fighting an administration, fighting a guidance system which is being interpreted differently in different areas. And I am not blaming the councils, because the decisions to limit access to childcare are not being made on a whim by councils. They're the result of the shrinking budgets and the failure to properly value the people who make childcare happen. And to follow on from Alistair Allen's contribution, which I thought was incredibly powerful, I think the loss that we have had in Scotland from losing childminders has been a real tragedy, because childminders as individuals have been able to provide the flexible, imaginative care inside communities where children are growing up. And it is right to say that the government have tried to stem the hemorrhaging. 50% of childminders we've lost in the 6 years between 2016 and 2022. But the policies and ideas that have been put forward are not filling the space anymore with childminders. It's basically just trying to stem the loss. And the sad thing is that with proper support, older parents, women who want to change work, men who want to change their life balance, could provide the most brilliant childminding facilities for their own children, but then later on going forward. We are losing a skill set of expertise that will be very, very hard to bring back. And to echo Megan Gallagher's contribution, if we cannot get childcare right, we are not going to do anything with the economy. If we can't get childcare right, the pressures that we're putting on families who will start making really serious decisions about whether they want, can afford a second child, is putting, if I put it at its politest, an unrealistic expectation of the parents of today. I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. I call Rachel Hamilton to be followed by Davy Russell. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and apologies for being a couple of seconds maybe late. I want to thank Jamie Green for bringing forward this members' debate today on early learning and childcare provision. I have not ordinarily been involved in educational debates because I've not been on the committee or I've not had the portfolio to speak on. However, recently I have been very involved with this specific issue because only last week a parent contacted me to share their concerns about the lack of affordable and accessible childcare, and I quote, she said, puts Scottish families even further behind those in England, with some pushed to the limit of affordability each month, which speaks to the importance of this topic. Many have spoken today about the importance of the accessibility of childcare to young children. And one important issue that isn't referred to explicitly in the motion, although I'd like to speak to it, is the importance of nurseries in rural communities. In places like the Scottish Borders, nurseries provide much more than just childcare provision. They support working parents, help attract new families. They keep rural primary schools alive and viable and safeguard the future of our rural towns and villages. Sadly, in the Borders, their future has come under threat recently. And over the past year, amidst the national insurance hike from Labour and the SNP's chronic underfunding of local councils, some families have been faced with the proposals of mothballing and compositing their classes in local nurseries into the educational setting of the primary school itself. And this has included places like Coburn's Path, Ednam, West Rother, Yetham and Sprouston. And these decisions have caused huge worry, and the threats have been felt very strongly by local communities, and the parents and families who have been in touch with me have said such things as, a parent said she would have to leave her job, a career she has worked very hard for. And after all, we want to encourage women into the workplace, not discourage them. Another shared that they feel as though they're being forced out of the village because of lack of access to childcare. Now, after or during COVID, many people moved to the Borders from the cities and have settled in rural villages. And some of the attraction was because of the standards of the schools and the educational offering that was being offered in the Scottish Borders Council area. Other families have told me that the nursery is so important to keeping their village vibrant and bringing in new families, and that any closure would have an impact for the future of the primary school and for the village itself. So I have some concerns that I would like to raise with the Minister, if she could respond to these in closing, which I have raised before, around mothballing. And I know that there is a review on the sections of the statutory guidance around mothballing in the lens of the Schools Consultations Act 2010. I did ask in the question just last week when that would come, and I think it would be great to have an answer for parents if that would be possible. I think this also speaks of the issues of delivering 1140 hours, which has been spoken about today. Everybody is signed up to ensure that we can make it a success of the 1140 hours and that it is accessible to everybody. But that is not possible when, for example, a mother and father of 3 children, or a mother or a father, whatever the setup of the family is, has a child whose nursery is threatened. They then have to move to the second choice. That child is then going to a different setting to his or her siblings. And so this is becoming very disjointed, it's becoming unsettling, and parents just want certainty, and they want to be able to go to their jobs with confidence and to ensure that their child is in a safe and nurturing setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. And I call David Russell. Mr Russell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and my thanks goes to Jamie Green for bringing this important motion to the Chamber. It has been an eye-opener to look into how local authorities differ in their interpretation of funded childcare. For obvious reasons, the statutory minimums of the term following a child's third birthday is fairly common, as noted in the West of Scotland, while some authorities, including Glasgow, offer funded placements essentially from a child's third birthday. My own constituency in South Lanarkshire is somewhere in between, with potentially a huge delay between March and August each year. With the start for the rest is not just a postcode lottery, but it's a birthday raffle as well, because it basically depends when your child is born. But I think we can summarise where local authorities can increase the eligibility of the funded childcare. They are doing so because there's a demand for it. We hear anecdotally about parents putting their career on hold to have children, but we all know that the majority of this is felt by women, with long-term consequences in career progression, salary, pension contributions and career fulfilment, which is to say that it's not just an economic issue, but it's a social justice issue as well. Unequal provision across local authorities also reflects upon the common attitude of nursery places provision. It's simply seen as a childcare while parents are at work, when of course it's a solid preschool foundation. It greatly helps in the child's development with language, physical development and socialisation, preparing for the big day when they start primary school. That should not come at the right time for and that should come at the right time for the child, not the right time for the vague statutory guidance. Yeah, there are difficulties with this. Recruitment, to name but one, but that doesn't seem to hinder our European neighbours, who take this issue very seriously and seem to come up with the solutions. All of that before mentioning that 1,140 hours is not even equivalent to a full-time job. I know parents on reasonable incomes who find it financially inviable to work full-time because of the current level of funded childcare is so difficult that they'd rather have their current postcode lottery and the various issues affecting the matter. We need action. Look, I know this is a complex issue with many parts. However, can we let common sense prevail here and let's fix it? I join colleagues in calling for a tightening up of the guidance as well as a wider review of the early learning child provision.
Thank you, Mr Russell. And I now call on Minister Nat. Point of order, Megan Gallagher.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. I should have mentioned within my opening speech that I do sit on the Pregnant and Screwed Advisory Board, so apologies for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. That will be on the record. And I now call on Minister Natalie Dawn-Innes to respond to the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank members for taking part in this debate and for their contributions today. And I do want to assure families around Scotland that we are listening to your concerns and reflecting on them. Now, early learning and childcare is central to this Government's approach to making Scotland the best place to grow up. It is absolutely vital, members have mentioned it, and we understand it is absolutely vital to supporting children's outcomes. And we know that the positive impact can be even greater for those families who experience poverty. More than that, our childcare sector is a pivotal part of Scotland's national economic infrastructure, one that is vital to enabling parents and carers to enter or return to work, increase their working hours or take up learning or training. Every year, we invest £1 billion in this crucial service, and families across Scotland have been benefiting from 1140 funded hours of high-quality early learning and childcare for all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2s since 2021. So I think the messaging, some of the messaging in the Chamber today isn't quite right in terms of the priority that the Scottish Government are putting on early learning and our understanding of the benefits for children's development, because we have been prioritising £1 billion of investment in this every year since 2021. I will take the intervention.
Megan Gallagher.
Minister for giving way, but if the Government was serious about childcare, fixing the problems and the expansion, why hasn't it expanded the funded childcare from 9 months onwards? That was a promise the SNP made, and it's a promise broken.
Minister.
We are expanding childcare in a number of ways, and I'm happy to get on to some of the different ways that we're doing so and exploring what it is that families actually need in Scotland, if I can make some progress in my speech. So if families did pay for this offer themselves, it would cost them more than £6,000 per eligible child per year. But that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, and I reiterate my commitment to listening to the views of parents, to those working in the sector, and of course members from across this chamber on how we can strengthen our national childcare offer. Now, I am very proud of the progress we've made over the last few years in delivering the expansion to 1140 hours. A fantastic collaboration between Scottish Government, between local government, between the childcare sector and the families across the country. And quality is at the heart of that expansion. I'm sure all members are encouraged that the Scottish Household Survey Childcare Report, published just this morning, shows that 91% of households receiving funded ELC were either very or fairly satisfied with the quality of provision. I'm very proud when I visit ELC settings across the country to see the difference that this investment is making in children's lives every single day. And not to forget the difference that it makes to parents, providing them, of course, with crucial support, reducing household costs and helping parents across Scotland to go out and work, train or study. I'm also proud of the support that we've prioritised for the ELC workforce. In the most recent budget, we committed a further £9.7 million to ensuring that the people who deliver these funded hours are paid at least the living wage. And unlike the UK Government, we've also legislated to introduce a nursery rates relief scheme through which we provide 100% relief on non-dom rates to eligible day nurseries, saving the sector over £11 million this year alone. I will take the intervention.
Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful to Natalie Dawn-Innes to take the intervention. Is the Scottish Government still confident that the private nursery sector financial model works?
Minister.
Mr Whitfield, I will get on to that funding model. I have something written down. I just want to finish up in looking at the kind of where we are right now, because I do think it's important to recognise how far we've come since we delivered this policy. 95% of 3- and 4-year-olds are registered to take up funded hours, and this is a testament to the childcare sector in Scotland that are delivering this every day. Now, throughout the delivery, we've been evaluating the ELC expansion, and we do now expect to publish a report on that first full evaluation in early 2026, covering several strands of including the Scottish study of early learning and childcare and parent and carer surveys carried out before, during and after the ELC expansion. And this is important because, as I've said, I am listening. And when these publish, we'll of course take the time to work with stakeholders across the ELC sector to understand what the reports tell us and what we can learn for the future. Now, I have listened with real interest to members' points about the start dates and about the equity in the system. And of course, I do appreciate the difficulties that parents face when systems change in their local area. Guidance, of course, was written in this way to allow local authorities flexibility, and I know that members across the chamber believe that local authorities should have flexibility because we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Now, any change to the current minimum expectation around start dates would require a change to legislation, and it would place additional duties upon local authorities. Within the current structure, local authorities, as members have rightly pointed out, do have the ability to put in place expanded or flexible arrangements locally should they choose to do so, and I know many of them have been doing that. But if this Parliament were to amend the minimum expectation, it would need to identify the significant additional funding required to cover the additional ELC hours the system would have to make available. And I'd also point out that even were start dates to be standardised to birthdays, it wouldn't necessarily deliver an equitable amount of funded ELC per child. In fact, in many cases, it could create a bigger disparity. And this is quite a technical, but I think quite an important point. Children currently exit funded ELC provision at different ages due to the standardised entry point once per year in primary school. So while allowing those children to start as soon as they reach 3 might seem fairer, those children who would receive the most extra entitlement because they're born before or during summer are already likely to be receiving a full 2 years of funded ELC. Now, I don't think that's the answer to everybody's concerns that they've raised today, but I do think it's an important point to highlight, and I think it makes clear that perhaps we need to look at other ways to improve equity in the system, and that's exactly why I stated that I am willing to listen and to discuss these issues. And I do agree with Mr Green, who pointed out that other options could be considered. I think also it's important to know the way Scotland deals with deferrals. This government has, of course, legislated to ensure that all children whose school entry is deferred can continue to receive funding ELC until they start school. And, of course, this is enabling families to make decisions in the best interests of their child without the need to apply to the local authority. And I think this is a really important step in supporting parents to make decisions in the best interest of their child. Now, I'm very conscious of time. I have not been able to get through my points, but I must come back to Mr Whitfield's point, because Mr Green, Mr Whitfield, other members mentioned the funding model, and I reiterate, I understand the concerns around this, and that's why a priority for me was to more effectively understand the costs involved, which is why I made it a priority to begin the cost collection exercise, helping us to understand this further and helping us to inform the guidance for setting rates next year. Now, I had a meeting with the ELC stakeholders just last week. I believe there is a feeling of positivity around this, and I'll share the outcomes from the sector later this year. Now, just to close, Presiding Officer, we are committed to giving every child in Scotland the best start in life, no matter their family circumstances. Our approach is based upon the needs of children. We continue to make significant investment in giving every single eligible child the opportunity to benefit from 1140 hours. That doesn't come without its challenges, though, and I hope I've been clear in the chamber today that I am willing to listen and to act upon concerns that members, families and the sector raise.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.